he made it clear to the Chinese in no uncertain terms, we are not your kinsmen. We are a multiracial Singapore.
Yeah. And we were already being called the third China,
Third China.
by Indonesia, for example.
By some people in Indonesia and in Malaysia.
Yeah.
How can I withdraw an endorsement that he has given me at my request? I mean, that would not sit well. It would be impolite. So they will be able to produce talented Singaporeans. Huge uproar. I could see it in the newsroom.
Among your colleagues as well.
My colleagues who are single women, they were outraged, even though they are the biggest beneficiaries of the policy, that they are Singaporeans, which gives me a lot of hope.
And a lot of joy.
A lot of joy that they are committed to this tiny place.
Cheong Yip Seng.
Hi, my friend.
My friend, it's such a joy, such a delight to have you sit here, and we're going to have a wonderful 45 minutes or 1 hour in this conversation. And I'm not sure whether I've told you this before, but you're one of the most admired persons for me. Your stories, your storytelling is masterful, and as I shared with you earlier, the beautiful thing about being a rookie in the 1980s, which is when I went in, right, is that we had mentors who were 10, 15 years older than us, who actually could tell us grandfather stories. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately today, I think because of the turnover in the media organizations, talented people, but the mentors, the supervisors are just a few years older than them, 2-3 years, And that is a problem, don't you think so?
Yeah, you see, there's a reason for this, Visva. In my time, the Singapore economic base was much, much smaller than it is today.
Yeah.
So talented people in the media, in the Straits Times, for example, they stayed with the media practically all their lives. And because of the experience that they accumulated over the years, they were wonderful teachers.
And not to mention the camaraderie.
And the camaraderie, because in those days, politics was a big issue. We were going through a very difficult patch. The PAP had to confront the Barisan, they had to confront UMNO in Malaysia. There's confrontation with Indonesia, bombs going off all over the place in Singapore.
Yes.
So we had great stories and we had great mentors.
And lived experiences.
Yeah.
So when a journalist writes from a place of experience and insight, what is the difference in that piece that you write compared to someone who may not have that kind of lived experience?
When you say piece, you mean the books that I wrote?
The books you wrote or the books that your colleagues wrote? Several of your colleagues have written books.
Yes, that's right.
So I'm talking about the fine art of journalism. And journalism is not about the technical craft of putting a sentence together. It's about what you impute into the lines and between the lines.
So as I said, because of the tumultuous times that we went through, the story told itself. We don't have to manufacture it. I mean, it was really being in a plantation with plenty of low-hanging fruits.
Yeah.
There were front-page stories every day.
Things were happening.
Globally
as well.
Globally as well, but regionally, internally. So it's a fantastic time to be a journalist.
Now, talking about the exposure, right, and journalism, you're probably one of the most widely traveled persons, especially in the 2 decades that you were editor-in-chief of the English and Malay and Tamil newspapers in SPH. Am I correct? You
Yes.
traveled extensively.
I traveled extensively before I became editor-in-chief and even after, because at that time, our leaders, Lee Kuan Yew, Goh Chok Tong, the first 2 prime ministers of Singapore, they spent a lot of time traveling. Traveling not for fun, traveling to promote the interests of Singapore.
And to understand the rest
and
of the
to
world.
understand the world.
Yeah.
So that took me to many places in the world.
What were some of the more exciting places, work-related, that you've been
Work
to?
related, I would say that
China, Mao Zedong?
China was one fantastic trip. And
When was this?
That was in 1976. And that was Lee Kuan Yew's first trip to China.
Yeah.
And it was a mind-blowing experience for me to see a huge country with a fantastic civilization, long history, on its knees. I mean,
Yes.
China was so poor, I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Well, Singapore wasn't that much richer, but it was abject poverty all over the country. But you look at China now. So it's because I've been there into China in 1976 that I can more appreciate the progress that they have made in one generation.
And when you're
But
right,
the trip to China, the big teaching point for me was how Lee Kuan Yew handled the visit.
you wanna tell
First,
us?
he wanted to see what the country was like. He'd never been there before. He only read about the country. But he took that opportunity to tell Singaporeans a very important lesson. Because at that time, the Chinese were very anxious to embrace Singapore, and in fact wanted to call us kinsmen. We are relatives, we are part of a larger family.
Yeah.
But this is where LKY's political skills, marvelous display. He made it clear to the Chinese in no uncertain terms, we are not your kinsmen. We are a multiracial Singapore.
Yeah.
We are not a Chinese country. We are not a Malay country. We are not Indian country. We are a multiracial country. And that was a very powerful lesson.
And he made that clear.
Yeah.
Was this the conversation he had when they were trying to bring India into the conversation because of the clash between China and India at that time?
Yeah, that was a story that S.R. Nathan told because he could see what Lee Kuan Yew did. The Chinese were trying to persuade Lee Kuan Yew to their version of the border dispute
between China and India.
Between China and India. And they gave him a book that was sympathetic to the Chinese side.
They gave Lee Kuan Yew a book.
Yes, because they wanted to persuade him that this is the correct version of events. And LKY responded and said, that is your version. There's yet another version. So what is the teaching point? That Singapore has got to be very careful. We are a tiny country. We must learn how to live with the big powers. And staying non-aligned in those days, staying neutral, not taking sides, is the best cause for Singapore.
And it's a tough cause. It
was a very tough cause.
Even today, it's exceptionally difficult
Absolutely.
to stay in the middle between the two giants,
Yeah.
So, I mean, these kinds of stories are so important. Do you feel that we have lost the oral tradition of telling stories, relating stories?
I'm not so pessimistic because I read books. I like reading books. And I see the writings of our young Singaporeans. These are not history books, These are books of fiction. But these are books of fiction based on actual events.
Right.
Based on actual events. For example, there's one called The State of Emergency by a young Singaporean writer called Jeremy Tiang. State of Emergency, where he examined critically, with critical eyes, the role of of ISA,
Internal Security
Act, and the portrayal of the people who went through that experience gives you an idea about how committed they are to this country, the kind of a country that they want to build. So I feel that, that there are Singaporeans, which gives me a lot of hope.
And a lot of joy.
A lot of joy that they are committed to this tiny place and they have a stake in it and they want a much better Singapore than they want Singapore today. Singapore is already a very great country, in my opinion.
Yes.
Having traveled around the world and seeing how other governments are handling difficult political issues, I think we should be very grateful that some of the major policies that have been implemented is serving us very, very well.
But let me come to this book. This is your second book, Ink and Influence.
Yes.
It's the second book. It's a sequel of sorts to your
Yes.
first book,
Yes.
which was, well, pretty controversial. The first
Yes,
book
yes, yes.
called OB markers. And,
Yes.
and it's a term that we adopt from golf, right?
Yes.
Outside, OB outside outside the bounds, out of bounds, outside the bounds. Now, we were just talking about, there's a new generation of people coming up with ideas, adapting, and so on. What it points to is that we do need to be a lot more open to contrarian views, a lot more open to different ways of doing the same thing or different ways of doing new things. Now, the sad thing is when you launch this book, when you launched the first book, OB Markers, right? You eyebrows were raised, and Bertha Hansen, right? Bertha Hansen, who really
My old
sees
colleague.
your colleague actually, she sees herself as a protege, and someone who benefited tremendously from your tutelage. She said this in her post in 2012 when you published the first book. And I quote her, "The thing about journalism is that we do not write about the difficulties of the craft. We just tell you about the information we have, not about how we got it or the hoops we've had to go through, the telephone calls we've had to field, the late night changes. It's all part and parcel of reporting and writing. Cheong's book gives a good insight into this. Sometimes the job is so tough that good people leave. Thank you, Cheong, for the book." This is what she put out when she read your first book, right? Now, actually, what's interesting is, as you know, I was a broadcast journalist, documentary producer for several years, and when I was studying in the USA, I had the opportunity to spend a month observing and working with Ted Koppel in ABC Nightline. And then I was in the pantry, this was in 1992, I was in the pantry, and Peter Jennings,
Yes,
who was a
broadcast-
news anchor for
Yeah.
ABC, he was there and he introduced himself, I introduced myself, and he said, "Oh, you're from Singapore?" And then I said, "Yeah, I'm a broadcast journalist." And then he started laughing and he said, "Broadcast journalists, you really have broadcast journalists or journalists in Singapore?" And he was obviously mocking at me. And I said, "Well, you are so used to hiding behind the First Amendment.
Yes.
Try removing the First Amendment, and then let's see who is a better journalist."
Yes.
He just looked at me, he apologized, and left.
No, I'm glad that you did that, Visva, because I think the Western media's conception and impression of Singapore is wrong.
Yeah,
They see us as being suppressed as a people,
yeah.
that we are cowed by the government into silence. But that's not the real Singapore.
It's not, and this is. I hope we'll be able to talk more about that. But what is interesting is when you published this book, and you had the launch event a few weeks ago in July, Bertha,
Yeah.
was not the most enthusiastic.
Yes.
In a response, right?
Yeah, she was disappointed.
She was disappointed, even though she still holds you in very high regard. I think she was disappointed on several fronts, and I'm going to highlight. I'm going to quote something she posted to show the nature of the disappointment. Right? It is a curious sign of the times when the Straits Times does not report that its ex-editor-in-chief has launched a new book, even though it was billed as a sequel to the controversial OB Markers, which its own book arm, Times Publishing, had published it in 2012. Or maybe that was the reason for ST, Straits Times, blacking out the book. Now, we all know that there are several things that happened at that time. Without abridging, if you could share with us what exactly happened, in particular, the email conversation that you had with Janadas Devan, who at that point in time was in charge of public communication for the government.
Well, there are 2 points of this I'd like to make. First, when Bertha made those comments, she was accurate. But subsequently, the Straits Times did publish a review of the book. So the Straits Times did not completely black out the book. So they did the review, which was a bit critical of me in parts, but I think it was a very good review of the book.
Okay.
That's the first point. Second point is, why was the first book so controversial?
Yeah.
It was controversial because of government intervention. I was then in Chile doing my work as non-resident ambassador in Chile when I received an email from Janadas demanding that I withdraw an endorsement of my book, the first book, by Lee Kuan Yew.
Okay, just want to get the details right. This happened in late 2012?
This happened in 2012, I think.
2012. I thought it was late 2012.
Yeah, that's right.
Late 2012. You were still non-resident ambassador to Chile. And you got the email from Janadas.
Yeah.
And what did the email say specifically to you?
The email demanded that I should withdraw from the book, the endorsement that was provided by Lee Kuan Yew.
And when you did, you sought his endorsement, did you?
I did, because I knew that for the first book, it is important for me to get endorsements for the book from as many people as
and especially
as possible.
the key players who you featured in the book.
Felt that Lee Kuan Yew endorsement would be good for me and for the book.
Right. And
when I sent him the request, I remember I did this when I was sitting in the South China Morning Post newsroom where I was the consultant. When I sent him the email seeking an endorsement, I got it within a day. He didn't even bother to ask to read the draft. I wasn't surprised that he didn't ask, because I knew that that was how the book publishing world operated. Because for 5 years of my life, Visva, I was involved in helping him with his memoirs. And I could see that he was sending requests out to his friends around the world.
Right.
Big name people, politicians,
yes.
corporate CEOs,
absolutely,
seeking endorsements. And he never provided the draft of his book to those people.
And that's exactly what you did. You
That's
didn't
exactly.
provide.
So I didn't see any reason why I should provide.
And he didn't ask for it.
He didn't ask for it.
If he was uncomfortable, he would have asked.
Yeah. And how can I withdraw an endorsement that he has given me at my request? I mean, that would not sit well. It would be impolite.
Yeah. So was Janadas Devan persistent?
He was persistent but he got nowhere with me, because I said I couldn't possibly withdraw.
So you didn't agree?
I didn't agree.
Okay.
But the publishers of the book, the Straits Times, they decided that for the second print of the book, they will not publish the endorsement.
Didn't Straits Times also make the decision that they will not promote?
Yeah, because when I came back from Hong Kong, the CEO of SPH then, Alan Chan, who dealt with the matter, told me that under pressure from government, they made one decision or two decisions. One, they will not reprint the book. Two, they will not promote the book. So having made those decisions, I guess I can understand why the Straits Times decided to treat publicity about my book the way they did.
Yeah.
Because of the commitment that they made.
Right. Now, about 3 months after this incident, in March of 2013, I was told that you were in NTU, National Technological University, giving a talk to media students, and then you got a phone call from an officer from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. What transpired in that phone call?
Yes, NTU, a friend of mine who's teaching there, Eddie Goh, old colleague, invited me to speak to the students about my book. But before the discussions began, I got this phone call from an officer from MFA telling me to make my final visit to Chile.
To Chile, Santiago.
And that meant that I only served one term, which is not usual. But I knew straight away
the two were linked.
They were most probably linked.
Right. Cheong, what was your intention in writing O.B. Marcus, writing the book? Was it to show up flaws in the government?
No, that's not the intention.
Was it a lobby for a change in the way the government deals with journalism? I mean, what exactly was your intent?
I feel that
you were fairly critical of the government.
Well, I wouldn't put it that way, but let me tell you why I did the book. I felt then, I still feel today that it's important for me to tell the public of Singapore, particularly the journalists, how Singapore is governed. And media relations was governed at that time. I can only talk about what I experienced.
Right.
I felt that it's important for them to understand that this is one part of the governance of Singapore. And I think Lee Kuan Yew put it in very graphic terms, compelling way. He said to effectively govern Singapore, you need to control three things: the army, the treasury, and the media.
Yeah.
So he straight away put clearly the position of the media in the governance of Singapore. And I felt that it's important for me to shine some light on this aspect of governance, so that journalists who join the media, the Straits Times, would know exactly what they're going to go in for. Yes, the terrain is tough, but it can be overcome. The problems can be overcome because while the government does want control over the media and it does have extensive powers over the media, the journalists have cards to play. And that's a point I wanted to make.
Yeah.
That look, you have got cards to play. And what's the two cards that you have? Card number one, I know that you cannot effectively govern Singapore if you do not have a media that is credible.
Yeah.
A media that has got no credibility is of no value to government. That's one card that the journalists have. And the second card is this: the government cannot afford to crush the media and to bring it to heel, because that is the surest way to drive talent from the newsroom. And no newsroom can really flourish without talent.
Yeah. Also, I think to add on to your point, right? If the media loses credibility as a whole, right, in times of difficulty or crisis, the government of the day won't have a platform to communicate credibly with the people.
Yes.
Because if the people don't trust the media,
Exactly.
And if the people don't see the
Exactly.
media as being credible, then the
Yes.
government will not be able to use that platform
True.
to propagate ideas or their concerns and get the ground to
Yes.
move with them. And it's interesting. I'd like to quote something you said in the book about LKY's, Lee Kuan Yew's approach
Yes.
to managing the media, to dealing with the media. And I quote, Lee Kuan Yew's blend of control of the media without destroying its credibility meant that no editor could avoid treading through terrain dotted with the landmines that were inherent in the job. But it also required the politicians to be politically savvy.
Yes.
What did you mean by that? Politically savvy?
I'll just give you an example,
Yeah.
Visva. A few months after I became editor-in-chief in 1987, small crisis erupted in Singapore. The Singapore government arrested a bunch of people they label as Marxist conspirators.
Operation Spectrum.
Operation Spectrum.
Yeah.
It was a big controversy because in the Catholic community,
And you're a Catholic.
and I'm a Catholic, I know from the community, the grapevine, the discussion that was going on, is that there's a different version of the people who were arrested. These people saw the people who were detained as not Marxist conspirators. They saw them as social activists,
Yeah.
wanting to do good for the disadvantaged. So that's one version of the story. Another version of the story, of course, is the government's version, that they are Marxist conspirators.
And liberation theology.
Liberation theology. Now, I am at a disadvantage
Yeah.
because I don't have access to information that the Singapore government has. So how do I deal with
or
this?
the internal security division.
Exactly. So I don't. The department is under the government.
Yeah.
I have no access to their information. So I'm at a disadvantage. So I got to take the story at its face value,
Yeah.
and I got to present this to the public. But how do I present it? I have to make sure of one thing, Visva, and I have to make sure that, knowing both sides of the story, I have to make sure that I prevent a collision between the state and the Catholic Church. Because there's a risk that this could happen.
And you could see the dangers and the writing
Yes.
on the wall.
I could see it because there was a press conference that Lee Kuan Yew held at the Istana, which I attended.
Yeah.
And who was there? Lo and behold, the Archbishop.
Gregory Yong.
Was a
Gregory Yong
was there. And when I saw him, I said, look, this is very unusual. But what was the message?
Yeah.
That there was a real risk of a collision between the two sides, and that would be disastrous for Singapore. So that's a kind of a situation that journalists have to deal with.
Somebody's got to say it. Somebody's got to talk about it. And journalists, as we know, don't always have the benefit of complete information.
Absolutely.
So we'll have to find a way to join the dots.
Yes.
And that's where integrity comes into play. And 1987 would have been exactly when you became editor-in-chief.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you just have to deal with it using your judgment,
Another example, if I may,
Yeah, please.
See, I was very fortunate that I took over at a time when SPH was really making a lot of money. I had the resources to recruit and hopefully retain as many of the talented people that I had. But talented people have got a worldview that is not exactly the same as the government's.
Yes.
How do I persuade them to stay in the company if I don't give them space to talk about the way they see Singapore going? And they see black spots in the picture, and they're not afraid to express them. I have to give them the opportunity to do that, because if I don't, I lose them, and the Straits Times cannot afford to lose talented people.
And
Fortunately for me, Visva, the commentaries that they wrote touch a pain point And I remember getting a call from LKY. Why is this columnist so anti-government? And I had to explain to him that these people are talented people who belong to a generation of Singaporeans whose worldview cannot be exactly the same as yours. And you don't give them space, you're going to lose them. And that cannot be good for us.
Were there?
To his credit,
Lee Kuan
he
Yew's-
accepted the point.
Yeah.
He accepted the point.
And that's precisely it, right? I mean, when you link this to what you said at the start of this conversation we had, that Lee Kuan Yew gave you his endorsement,
Yes,
right? Without even asking what the contents are.
yes,
It's because there was that level of trust between the two of you that comes about as a result of working together, disagreeing, finding middle ground over
Yes.
the years, that there's that level of trust. And it's that level of trust that will also allow you to persuade the powers that be of the day to review the way they make decisions.
Well, I don't know whether what I said would lead them to review their positions.
But you'll have to persuade.
But I do know, Visva, that I was very fortunate that I was able to earn Lee Kuan Yew's trust. He trusted my intentions were not intended to sabotage or undermine Singapore.
Now, the question I have is this. Trust is a positive word.
Yes.
It's a positive quotient.
Yes.
However, taken to an extreme, trust can also be blind loyalty.
Absolutely.
And which then brings you to the quadrant of integrity.
Yes.
Questions of integrity. So I'd like to quote another part of your book. You said, the government cannot afford a media that has little credibility. Stifling talent in the newsroom is a sure way to cripple it. I was also guided by the wishes of the electorate. 2/3 of the voters want a PAP government. So a pro-establishment slant could be justified. I must say that I found this a bit disturbing because, should this be the principal consideration of a newspaper editor? Now, isn't that somewhat populist, what you're suggesting here? If 2/3 of the people support them, regardless of whether they have the government of the day had integrity, if 2/3 support them, then I should support the 2/3.
That story is incomplete, Visva, and I'll explain to you why.
Okay.
2/3 may support the PAP, but what does it also mean? 1/3 doesn't. 1/3 doesn't. And it's my responsibility as a newspaper editor to make sure that the voices of the 1/3 is not suppressed. And that is why if you look at the Straits Times when I was running it, I made sure that the paper reflected the totality of Singaporean thinking. Yes, 2/3 think the pro-establishment way, but there's 1/3 that is anti-establishment. And I cannot afford to stifle those voices.
So how do you give voice to those voices?
By
Airtime to those voices?
By giving space to writers who've got a different worldview, and to give space to those people who are upset or disagree with government policy. I'll give you an example. Lee Kuan Yew made a very famous speech, the graduate mother's speech, where he said that the talent pool in Singapore is shrinking. He had to do something about it, and one thing he needed to do is to try and get graduate women married so they will be able to produce talented Singaporeans. Huge uproar.
Yeah.
I could see it in the newsroom.
Among your colleagues as well.
My colleagues who are single women, they were outraged, even though they are the biggest beneficiaries of the policy. What did I do? Letters flooded in. And I think for the first time, I haven't seen this ever happening in the Straits Times since, I opened up 2 pages in the paper. In those days, social media was not felt then. So print was king in those days. 2 pages of the paper were given to the protest of the Singaporean.
Oh, that's a lot of
There's a lot
space.
of people, a lot of space. to the credit of LKY and the government, not a word of protest. Not a word of protest. In other words, they knew that it's not to their advantage to suppress dissenting voices, especially when it comes to a major policy.
Is it true, I mean, linking up to this point, is it true that Lee Kuan Yew, even though he had the power to sack people, and even though he had the power to directly intervene and change things and order that this has to be done particular way, he didn't really resort to that
No, he
that
didn't.
often.
He didn't push the envelope.
So why did he resort to the laborious negotiation, persuasion approach when actually he could have dictated?
With the media, I think that he knew that with the media, that approach is not the best way of dealing with it.
Why?
Because he got to also give some weight to the thinking of the people who ran the media. I just give you a couple of examples about how open he is to the views of our side, not just his side. I was once called into Lim Kim San, my chairman's office, one day.
Who was
then
cabinet minister?
executive chairman. He was executive
But before
chairman.
that, he was cabinet minister
he was a retired.
for a long
he
time.
was a retired
Yeah.
heavyweight minister,
Yes.
and he was my chairman. He showed me a letter that he had just received. It's a letter from Lee Kuan Yew, wanting a certain colleague of mine to be removed from the newsroom. I read the letter. I told Mr. Lim, it can't be done. How can I remove somebody I had rated highly? You'd be stupid of me. My what do you call a staff appraisal system would just collapse.
Yeah.
I just can't accept that request. Lim Kim San thought for a few moments, put the letter away. I never heard any more about that matter. I was one day having my usual afternoon swim exercise. I got a call from a certain inspector. I knew who was going to be on the line. He was on the line and he said that, look, I've got another person who I think is a more suitable candidate for this editor's job. How about we do a swap? I said, no. The guy who is now running the show is doing a pretty decent job. He left the matter. He never pursued it.
Goes back to the issue of trust in that relationship, right?
Yes.
That he was able to do that. Now,
And he was able to do that because he knew that my intention as an editor is not to undermine the fundamental interests of the country. It is in fact to promote the interests of the country.
but when you talk about that, you see, the thing that I can't quite wrap my head around is Lee Kuan Yew and of course Dr. Goh Keng Swee, Rajaratnam, these Lim Kim San, they were brilliant individuals with strong character.
Yes.
And also with a sense of integrity as well.
Yes.
A sense of very acute sense of right and wrong. Now, I can't quite understand how we could come up with the Newspaper and Printing Presses Act of 1974. I can understand the logic at a totalitarian level, but it has a chilling effect on the ground. And the optics should have mattered a lot more. For example, Mr. S.R. Nathan was executive chairman of SPH. What was he? Before that, he was Mr. Intelligence. He was head of security intelligence, Singapore CIA. He was in charge of domestic intelligence, ISD, right? And then we had subsequently the first executive director, CEO of SPH, later was Cheong Yip Seng,
Yes.
who was director of ISD,
Yes.
taken over by Alan Chan,
Yes.
who was also a permanent secretary.
Yes.
Now, we all know that the government would not have been able to determine who sits on the board, who chairs the board, who is the CEO, if not for the Newspaper and Printing Presses Act,
Yes.
which has the provision of management shares given
Yes.
to. So why do we need to resort to that when you actually have an open channel with the people who are running the newspaper? Why have something like this sit there, which actually discredits the integrity of the newspaper, which in turn discredits Singapore?
That's one way as well of looking at it,
Yeah,
that the Act confers on the government enormous reserve powers.
absolutely.
But you're right in saying that these are not good optics. But good optics do not mean they reflect the reality on the ground. And the reality on the ground is this. The journalists, editors do have cards to play. I played those cards. And I think those cards have enabled me to provide a diversity of opinion in the pages without harm to either the journalist or to the paper. So while the government has extensive powers, as you say in the printing presses, the law, that doesn't tell the whole story. The reality on the ground is that the journalists, the editors, have got agency. They have got cards to play. And for the system to succeed, Visva, the cards that they have to play must be used if necessary. Not to use... No, the greater harm to Singapore and to the media would be by editors who do not recognize that they have cards, and they should use those cards only if they are necessary.
So judicious use
use of the
yes.
cards.
Now, I hear you, and in your book and the earlier book, you did give credit to people like Mr. S.R. Nathan.
Yes.
Right? You did. Where they stood up for the interests of the journalists and journalism.
Yes.
Could you share with us one of those occasions, especially with someone like S.R. Nathan? You know,
S.R. Nathan was with us for 6 years, I believe. When he first arrived, the first morning of his work at Straits Times, some of my colleagues, some of the journalists were wearing black armbands.
In protest
against his arrival.
Because he came from intelligence.
Because of his background. The optics.
And he was with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and
government intervention. But when he left, people were very sad that he left. Because they knew that during the time he had with us, he did a lot of good for the newsroom. He did a lot of good for the newsroom. He tried to bridge the gap between the government and the media. And I think he succeeded very well. And one reason I can give you, Isva, about how he was, he never sought to look at the stories that we published, that we were intending to publish. Never intervened.
Although he was executive chairman.
Although he never intervened. In fact, I remember there was a delegation from the Chinese People's Republic of China. They came to the newsroom and wanted to know where the censor was sitting. There was no censor in the newsroom. No censor. And although S.R. Nathan was a monitor put in by Lee Kuan Yew in the Straits Times, never did he ever interfere with an editorial decision. The only time he did, and I got to tell this story correctly because I got to give it context. He got a call one afternoon from, at that time, the Foreign Minister, S. Dana Balan. Dana had heard that our reporter had secured an interview with a Vietnamese foreign minister called Nguyen Co Tang.
Yeah. And
Nguyen Co Tang is a very savvy politician. And he wanted SR to know that this was what had happened, and he should pay some attention to this. So SR Nathan asked to see a copy of the story. There was great resistance from Peter. At that time, he was in charge.
Peter Lim.
But Peter Lim subsequently agreed to show him the story. And S.R. Nathan then looked at the story and then told Peter what transpired between him, S.R. Nathan, and Dana. What transpired was Dana provided him some background information. And that background information was essential to the story. And when Peter got hold of information, he made some changes. I think some changes were made to the story. But S.R. Nathan never looked at the final version. Never looked at the final. So that's the quality of the sophistication that he showed. And that is the reason why when he left, there was sadness in the newsroom. Yeah. Such a sharp contrast to when he first arrived.
That's a fantastic, fantastic story. And, what comes to mind is this whole idea of intervention.
Yes.
Right. You spoke quite extensively about intervention, right? Now, intervention is often seen as pejorative. But intervention, as we know, in different circumstances can actually be very positive.
Yes.
And without intervention and timely intervention, the consequences can be disastrous.
Yes.
Right? Now, you highlighted that, you actually said, in a quote, the most consequential newsroom intervention was in 1986, and I remember it very well too, when the Israeli president Chaim Herzog visited Singapore.
Yeah.
And Malaysia protested, Indonesia protested.
Yes.
And it was a very, very difficult time. Now, you had highlighted that was instructive. What you learned from that. Can you share with us what exactly happened? What are the lessons you learned as journalists? And what exactly was the nature of the intervention by Lee Kuan Yew?
You see, the Malaysian Malays were angry with the visit. In fact, Mahathir wanted Singapore to cancel the visit, which Singapore, of course, could not do. And the reactions were so fierce that some people actually went down to the causeway and laid across the railway line, blocking traffic between the two sides.
Yeah.
That shows the depth of anger and feelings in the Malay community up north. Unfortunately for us, Wiswa, the Straits Times at that time was relying a great deal on our sister paper, the New Straits Times, for coverage of that story. Our own correspondents, we didn't have a large team over in KL. We were relying on the New Straits Times to a large extent.
To cover it.
But unfortunately, New Straits Times tried to soften the optics so that the situation will not get worse. But
so didn't want to
they didn't want
fuel
to they don't want to fuel it.
Yeah.
Which is in the DNA of the Straits Times, they didn't want to allow a situation to explode to the detriment of the society.
Which is not a bad consideration. Not unreasonable.
Unreasonable.
Yeah.
But we forgot the flip side of it. And the flip side, as Lee Kuan Yew saw it, was this. He was accusing us, the Straits Times, of misleading the Singaporean reader of what is really happening in Malaysia, the intensity of feelings. And he felt that we had missed an opportunity to tell the Singaporeans what it is like or what it was like to live in a neighborhood like ours. It is a turbulent neighborhood. And given our short history during Malaysia, you must know how turbulent it can get. So he saw that as a failure on the part of the Straits Times to be politically savvy enough to see that here's an opportunity to educate the Singaporean. So that really got him really upset. And he forced a leadership change as a result. Editorial leadership change.
And the following year you came in.
And then, in fact, he followed that up. This is how he did it. A few weeks before I took over my job
as Editor-in-Chief,
he asked me to see him in his office at the Istana. And two things happened during a short visit, half an hour. The first thing he did was to turn his chair around, picked up a copy of the Utusan Melayu, and he would flip the pages in front of me, and he would say softly, "This is what I read every day." That's his way, very powerful way of telling me, "Young man, you better pay attention to what's happening in the neighborhood.
How good was your Bahasa?
Bahasa was absolutely hopeless. But that was a very powerful message that he put across.
Message and tutelage.
Tutelage, but done in this very inimitable way.
Absolutely. So, I mean, the reason why I'm bringing this up is when we talk about press freedom, when we talk about intervention and all these other terms, we are guilty of perhaps putting them on a binary equation.
Yeah.
But actually, it's on a spectrum.
Yes.
And the key word is judgment.
Yes.
The person in charge has to make the judgment
Yes.
call. So, for example, this whole incident about the visit by Israeli President Herzog, there are different ways you can look at it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, one need not argue that Lee Kuan Yew's version of it or his approach to it is the only approach.
Yep.
Right? But it forces us to think.
Yeah.
Think about different considerations.
Yeah.
And that's what I found really useful from what you shared. Now, fast forward 2005, the year after Lee Hsien Loong took over as Prime Minister, you stated in the book, by the way, I love these stories in the book. Anyone who wants a crash course on Singapore's history in the earlier days must read this book. And I would say this. In 2005, Lee Hsien Loong as Prime Minister had summoned editors where he expressed his displeasure about the Chinese daily, Lianhe Zaobao, right, actually writing quite extensively pro-China pieces, the tilt towards China, so to speak. What was that about? And do you think that was necessary, where the Prime Minister of the state actually summons the editors to express his displeasure about something?
This story has a longer history, Visva. And it shows the consistency of policy of the PAP government.
Yeah.
When Lee Kuan Yew went to China, he wanted to make sure that the world knew where he stood on China. We are not their kinsmen. Why did he do that?
Yeah.
Why did he do it? Because in those days, our neighbors, Malaysia and Indonesia, had suspicions that we are really a third China. And I can understand why they saw it this way, because when Singapore became independent, there was enormous pressure on the PAP government to make Chinese the national language. Chinese chamber says that, look, we're a majority. Why can't Chinese be the national language? To their credit, the PAP stood firm and said no, because that would be disastrous. That would be a strategic error for Singapore. We cannot afford to be a third China. In the same way,
and we were already being called the third China,
a third China
by Indonesia, for example.
By some people in Indonesia and in Malaysia.
Yeah.
And that is a powerful label.
Yes.
That's a very powerful label. Because you look at Singapore, 70% of the people are Chinese.
Yeah.
And in those days, the majority of Chinese children, they went to Chinese schools.
Yes.
They went to Chinese schools. So I can understand the thinking of the Malaysians and Indonesians. But it's a label we cannot afford to stick.
Yes.
That would be bad for us. So you see the policy continuity. 2005, Lee Hsien Loong, I don't read Chinese. He reads Chinese. He could see these tendencies surfacing in the Chinese media. And at the time, Zaobao also had quite a number of people recruited from PRC to augment the newsroom. So it's not difficult to join the dots.
Yeah.
The dangers that are ahead. So he was just sending a cautionary note that, hey, Singapore's foreign policy posture must remain that we must not be aligned to any big power. And that's a policy that has served us well. We cannot allow to undermine it. So I can understand why he took the precautionary step that he did.
The reason why I brought this up, Cheong, is this, and we are coming to the end of the interview. You know, philosophically, the Singapore government, the Singapore system of media freedom and so on has been frowned upon, scoffed at by several countries in the West, you know. And using that, the label of freedom to express, fundamental freedom to express and so on, they scoff at the alignment between the government of the day and the mainstream media. Now, you and I, as journalists, ex-journalists, would want a certain level of freedom. Otherwise, we are not worthy of being called journalists. But there's, at the same time, nothing wrong with having these dialogue sessions where we are apprised of the government's thinking. Because at the end of the day, we are accountable to the people of the country. That's what it is.
Yes.
And if the government of the day is not a rogue government, but it has a certain consistency of view, which is in the best interest of the people, I don't see anything wrong with the media, the mainstream media, actually putting out strong arguments to support what the government is saying. I mean, I know that there are many people who are watching this would say that this is a cop-out. But I think the time has come for us to ask some of these inconvenient questions. Is it necessarily bad for there to be a symbiotic relationship of sorts between the government of the day, if it's not a rogue government, the government of the day, and the key media players? What's your view?
Visva, you have put your finger on the most important point of our conversation. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. What do I now see? Look at the outcome. You can argue about the type of systems that we have, right or wrong. Both sides have got strong arguments. But look at the bottom line. The bottom line is this. Now, I read the Western media diligently every day.
Absolutely.
And lately, what do I see? In recent weeks, in the Financial Times, articles praising what Singapore is doing and telling the British government, learn from Singapore. They are doing things right. And when you travel, I just came back from London. I could see the results of what we are doing. A policy that was established years ago. Healthcare. LKY insisted on co-payment, that it cannot be given free. In UK, you can get free treatment under the national health system. But boy, Visva, you got to wait months for your turn. My granddaughter was there studying for 3 years. She had a medical problem that needed treatment. But the NHS could only give her a date 3 months from the time she brought up the problem. So what did she do? She had to resort to a GP. That consultation and medication set her back £800.
A GP consultation.
A GP consultation. So I look at the outcome. I think we have a superior system.
Yeah. Not without its flaws.
No system is perfect.
Absolutely.
But I'd rather be in our situation than to be in that situation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And my final question to you, and I hope that you would be as frank as you've been throughout this interview. What is your appeal? What is your message to Prime Minister Lawrence Wong about the relationship, the very precious and important relationship between the 4G leadership of Singapore, which I have great respect for over the months, and the media ecosystem? I say ecosystem because it's no more about MediaCorp SPH. You've got several other players.
Yes.
You know, Mothership, you've got podcasts, you've got all kinds, which is not a bad thing at all.
Yeah.
So what is your message for the future of Singapore? What's your message to our Prime Minister?
I would say that you cannot effectively run a country without paying adequate attention to the media. Is it a healthy media? Is it a sycophantic media? Is it a credible media? How do you maintain that a relationship with the media that is good for the country? I hope he gives sufficient attention to that.
And what does that constitute? What is the most important component of that to maintain a credible, a good media scene? What are the three things that are absolutely critical?
The most critical thing is to have a system which allows a diversity of opinion. And you got to adapt to the conditions that you are now living in. The electorate in Singapore today is not the electorate of my time. When I was growing up, even if the PAP puts up a guy who's totally uneducated, he'll be elected because a brand name is so powerful.
Yeah.
The PAP does not enjoy that privilege anymore. It has to fight for every vote. And to be able to win that vote, it's important to pay attention to the media, the health of the media, the credibility of the media, because it's part of the governance of Singapore. It's not a side story, it's part of the main story.
And that's extremely well put. And I would just add one point. I think the government needs to continue to be firm, clear, and they need to listen. I know that we can have many engagements, but you can have engagements without listening.
Yes.
And listening with an open mind is, I think, what will actually strengthen the media ecosystem.
Absolutely. But I've got great confidence in our electorate. We have a savvy, politically savvy electorate. And this is an electorate that has given a mandate to the PAP every time since independence. And they are not stupid electorate. Keep faith with the electorate. Know how they are also changing and what their needs are.
Yeah. Cheong Yip Seng, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and with such clarity.
Thank
I
you,
wish you all the
Rizwa.
best.
Thank you,
All the
Rizwa.
best.